Okay. Yep, says I can start. Ken is saying, Rick is saying I can start. So welcome to the San Ramon Valley Unified School District Board of Education meeting. We want to let the public know that we are video recording tonight's board meeting. The recording is being live streamed on the district's YouTube channel, and a link to the recording has been posted to the district's website. I'd like to introduce my fellow board members. First, I am Greg Marble. I'm president of the board. Then we have Ken Mintz. If you'll raise your hand, Ken. There's Ken Mintz. We also have Susanna Ordway. And we have Mark Jewett. And we have Rachel Hurt. There we go. So we're all here. We are now going to do the Pledge of Allegiance. So if you'll join me in your virtual Pledge of Allegiance, please. Ready? Begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, we have actions taken in closed session. During this evening's closed session meeting, the Board of Education made the following administrative appointments effective July 1, 2020. Ryan Maloney is our new principal at Bella Vista Elementary School. The vote was unanimous. We're now going to go on to item 8.1, acceptance of open session agenda. Is there a motion?
You have minutes first, Greg.
Oh, I missed it. I apologize. Acceptance of minutes, 7.1. Minutes of May 5th, 2020. Is there a motion?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
There's a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
And actually, I apologize. Let's do this as one motion. So we're approving minutes from May 5th, 2020, May 11th, May 15th, May 16th, and May 18th. So I apologize. We're doing it for all those. All right. So there was a motion by
Ken.
Ken and a second by Rachel. Okay. All in favor, say aye.
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 Motion carries. Thank you. We have agenda approval and consent, acceptance of open session agenda, 8.1.
So moved.
There's a Susanna has moved it. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, it sounds like I'm going to give that one to Mark. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
8.2, approval of consent. So consent items are considered routine in nature and are approved by combining them into a single vote. A member of the board or a member of the public may request that a consent item be removed from the consent agenda to be considered and voted on separately. So with that, I'd like to also point out that we all received revisions to 12.1, which is our HR actions, consideration approval of certificated personnel changes. There was a revision that was sent to us. All right, with that, is there a motion to approve consent?
Move approval on consent.
Rachel has moved and Susanna has seconded. Any further questions or comments? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
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 And Mr. Marvel, can the minutes reflect that on item 12.6, ratification of warrants, I need to recuse myself on any item having to do with AT&T or other telecommunication providers.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Moving on, 9.1, public comment for non-agenda items. Do we have any non-agenda item comments received, Cindy? You're on mute.
We
There
do,
we go.
and that is in your script. We had 4.
Oh, there it is. 4 comments, all related to the 2021 school year. Comments, questions, and concerns touched on length of the school day, type of instruction, student mental health, and high school athletics. And we've also received numerous comments sent to us individually as board members and usually as for all board members. And those have all been responded to by staff as well, separate from this agenda item. Okay, we're going to move on to 9.2. We have one comment that was submitted. This is from Ann Katzberg, the president of SRVUSD. Dear trustees, this is the last school board meeting of our school year. It goes without saying, this year has been a school year like no other. Just 4 short months ago, we were expecting the Proposition 98 guarantee for 2021 to be approximately $84 billion, a new all-time high. Today, we face a sobering budget landscape due to the COVID-19 pandemic that includes a shortfall spread out over the next 3 years, guaranteeing extreme uncertainty for our financial future. We have learned during the last 10 weeks how fundamental our public schools are, our economy. The pandemic has also shined a light on the inequities and the digital divide that exists in our schools across the state and in our community. We cannot afford to lose critical programs at a time when our students need us now more than ever. We need solutions as we listen to the budget reports and the unfavorable tasks of cutting $8 million from our budget, from your budget, the district's budget. You need to prioritize our students. The May revise has some unsettling cuts to our ADA, but there were ways to defer and mitigate the impact on our budgets. There were promises made to our LEAs, our local educational agencies, to provide additional money to offset the pension liability. There was a promise made in January from Governor Newsom to spend more on special education, and this remains in his May revise. Your advisors, school services, has given suggestions on how to prepare for your future by borrowing funds from your savings to be paid back through a deferral. Tonight in our agenda are 2 issues that were brought to my attention for my members. One of the items is the increase in salary to our management. I know this is routine in nature, as our managers have the Me Too clause with SRVUSD. However, doing increases at a time of budgetary demise is problematic. I remember during the Great Recession, Superintendent Steve Enoch declined his increase in salary to show solidarity with the struggle we were all facing at that time. We're going to need to make sacrifices, and I hope the decisions you are making will ensure the cuts being made will be as far away from the classroom as possible. We need solutions that will generate more funding for our schools. And another item on the agenda is the schools and communities first resolution. We are in need of adding this critical revenue for our schools now more than ever. Again, your advisors, school services, have shared the political landscape that looks favorable for this proposition as our communities recognize how valuable our schools are in our economy. We all need to support creative ways to generate revenues for our schools. It is critical we all participate in a mindset prioritizing our students. We know we need help from the federal government. We know we need our legislators to suspend tax credits in order to prevent further devastating cuts to our schools. And we need our legislators to provide flexibility for our future. We as a district must provide flexibility in gearing up for the fall. One thing I learned throughout my teaching experience is just when I thought I had everything figured out, something would throw a loop, and I quickly realized I needed to adapt. Adapt to the students who needed my support, adapt to the curriculum that prioritized a new concept, ensuring best practices, adapt to a new grade level team, adapt to a new school, adapt to a new parent community, adapt to a new principal, adapt to a change in my own life. Hold on here. Jobs demand adapting to a different set of circumstances, not only yearly, but sometimes day by day. We're used to functioning in the midst of uncertainty, and I know we are up to the task to make sure our students get the best education possible. I appreciate the opportunity to work with Ed Services in developing our future. We know we need to plan for the unknown without any guidance. The guidance on how to proceed requires all of us to not only combine the expertise of everyone, but overplan for what possibly could happen. a plan A, B, C, D, and E to make sure we have thought out every possible scenario. This is our last week of school. I know we are navigating uncharted territory. In attending a recent graduation for my niece on Zoom, I was struck by the intimacy of the ceremony and the depth of emotions prevailing throughout this rite of passage. I am more connected to my family because of our weekly Zoom gatherings, where I get to hear about the latest developments in everyone's lives. The geographical divide that kept us at a distance before has vanished, where our entire world is virtually separated. Has this pandemic shed light on how we can adapt? Even though we are not functioning as we had before the March 13th shutdown, we are functioning, and in some cases, this difference has provided a silver lining we never could have anticipated. So in anticipation for our summer vacation, to prepare for our next school year, I know we will not only get through this, we will figure out how we can all roll up our sleeves and plan together for our students. They deserve nothing less. Thank you. So Cindy, I'm assuming we've received no additional comments from other union presidents?
That's correct.
Good. All righty, we're moving on. We're on to action items. So 10.1, public disclosure of the major provisions of the 2019-2020 salary agreements for management and confidential employees in accordance with the requirements of AB 1200, AB 2756, and Government Code Section 3547. So, Mr. Medici.
Thank you, Trustee Marvel. All of this information has been fully reviewed by the County Office of Education. The $461,676 is the business office's estimate of all management and confidential, including contracted employees. So all the information is here, and thank you for your consideration tonight.
Okay, thank you. So before we have a motion on this item, we received 335 emails from district staff and community members asking the board not to approve a 2.56% raise for management employees and confidentials. The same raise all non-management employees received earlier this year. Trustees will receive a copy of all communication, which will also be added to the minutes. So with that, I need a motion on 10. Let's see, this is just public disclosure. Don't believe that requires approval. Is that correct? Right, does not, this is just, yeah, good, does not require approval. So 10.2, first of all, before we in 10.1, are there any questions from board members concerning the public disclosure on 10.1? Hearing none. Moving to 10.2, this is an action item. Consideration of approval of salary adjustment for Tier 4 management and confidential employees effective July 1, 2019. Is there a motion and a second? Then we'll open it up for discussion.
I'll move approval.
Okay, Mark has made the motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, Rachel has seconded. Okay, discussion. Who would like to start? Board members.
All right.
Mark.
I'll kick it off. 330 speaker cards and a number of emails over the last 24, 48 hours. And I've read every one that have come to me. And there's quite a bit of energy around this particular topic. I want to recognize it and I want to validate it. If our community thinks we are not discharging our fiduciary duty with fidelity, then they should hold us to account. So I do appreciate the feedback. What I'd like maybe to start off with is just a quick narrative, just to maybe frame a broader discussion just around timing. When this district negotiates with our bargaining units, at least the practice for various reasons since I've been on the board has always been in arrears. And what I mean by that, in corporations where I've worked for my entire career, we always settle on merit increases for the next year in the current year, meaning as we approach the end of the year, our merit increases are negotiated and set to take place in the following year. In this district, through a number of reasons, as I've said, we negotiate for 2019-20 salary increases. We negotiated late into the summer, fall, winter, and into the early spring. Those raises take effect July 1st of 2019. So when we settled with our bargaining units in totality, boy, I'm getting old, memory serves, early March, I think it was, right before we shut the schools. Those salaries were for July 1st, 2019 through June 30th, 2020. Now we can maybe put a pin in the Me Too clause, which has generated a lot of angst in the community, and we can come back to that if need be. But when we settle with all bargaining units, the Me Too clause kicks in. So we in essence settled with our management employees as well as of July 1st, 2019. So to ask management now to not accept a pay raise that was negotiated starting last summer into the fall and into the winter is a little bit like asking them to give back salaries, because it is as effective as of July 1st, 2019, as it is with all of the bargaining units. So I think that request, although again, I'm validating, I honor it, and I understand the community concern, I think that request would send a very demoralizing message to our management staff. And this includes assistant principals, includes district staff, all the way up to the assistant superintendents, the superintendent. That is a message that I don't think is rooted in the way, at least this board, and I'll just say my own personal opinion, this board member's opinion of their performance and their level of effort over the last year. So just again, it's just framing the narrative of the timing. It looks as if we are authorizing a raise today, right on the precipice of economic catastrophe, when this raise was really negotiated all the way through a time when nobody had any understanding of an economic catastrophe happening. So let me stop there and see if anybody has any reactions to my comments.
Okay. Susanna.
Yeah, no, same. I also had the same, reaction, I think. Because I got confused of, are we talking about this year's salary or ongoing or, back? And it gets a little confusing when you have the budget in arrears. And I think that's part of the confusion. And then also, I want everyone to know that we do listen, and I do, as Greg and Mark had said, we received over 300 emails just for today. I also read everyone, and we do listen to our community, our parents, teachers, everyone, and we realize your concern, right? Our budget, how are we going to do this? But then I also thought, well, I'm also listening to parents and teachers on your ask and sometimes demand on what we're going to be delivering in the fall. Even this summer, what are we delivering this summer and in the fall? And that actually requires more work of our district administrators. Parents and teachers have asked for more structure, guidance, direction on how to do school in the new normal, right? And that actually requires definitely recognizing teachers' efforts, recognizing our classified employees' efforts, but also our district management efforts, because they are actually doing all the research now, right, on what's best for our students coming this fall. So like Mark had mentioned, if we were to ask them, hey, we can't give you this now, what is that signal, that we're giving to our administrators when we're asking them also to do more work? That's kind of my take on it.
Okay. Rachel?
I think Ken was ready to go. Were you taking? the
Oh,
breath
I'm sorry. I
away?
didn't see I apologize, Ken. I didn't see your hand up. Go for it, Ken.
I didn't, but I guess I'm starting to move forward, Rachel. So that's fine. I'll go ahead. Thank you, Rachel. I'll just start out first. Yes, I too read all of the emails that came to me since early this morning, particularly today. So I'm all day long. And quite frankly, I do appreciate people sharing their thoughts, opinions, their comments with us on all of these topics. But let me start with just a quick analogy. I've been a scout leader for many years. And when we're out doing campouts and backpacking trips, every meal, one of the kids is required, or a number of the kids are required to cook for the others. The rule has always been cooks eat last. That when you're preparing, when you're taking that role on, you're assuming responsibility to make sure that everyone else is fed before you can take your own. And what I see with our management and confidential employees, they've waited till last to make sure that all of our other employees have been taken care of through our collective bargaining arrangements. And they've been waiting as long as any of them and more than most of them in terms of being able to get, as Mark indicated earlier, quite frankly, salary increases and payment that are due to them since July 1st of this past year. And as Susanna mentioned, we expect a lot of these folks that doesn't show up immediately in a classroom as a teacher's work might, but is creating the foundation for all of the success that those teachers are then bringing to our students. We can't do without those administrators and leadership any more than we can without teachers in the classroom and our classified employees, our bus drivers, our print shop, everyone who's putting this school district together, our 4,000 employees who are working here for the betterment of all of our students. And yes, there are management employees that are making more than teachers in the classroom. Just like any other leadership structure, there's increased responsibility and there's compensation for different levels of responsibility. But at the same time, we also have schedules of payments, and we abide by those schedules and those contracts. And the items that we're voting on today are reflective of those schedules and contracts. So I will be voting in favor of these. But like I say, I appreciate the comments that were given to us. My hope is, though, that as people understand the full situation of how we compensate our employees and the practice that we follow for all employees, that they'll understand better what we're dealing with. And quite frankly, my last point will be, and yes, as many have mentioned, we're going to be going through a very, very difficult budget period that's exacerbated because of the COVID-19 situation, but also given the way that that budgets are set for us that we then deal with, whether it's through the state or the federal government. And yes, we're going to have to be dealing with that situation as well. And just like we provide compensation for our employees, I'm very hopeful that all of our employees, as well as our community, are going to stand behind us and with us and engage with us in coming up with solutions that will continue to focus the attention on what's best for kids and their education in our community. Thank you.
Okay, Rachel.
I too received over 100 emails today, and then I'm looking forward to reading the additional public comments that were sent via Cindy to the district. I appreciate that our community is engaged in what we do, and that's important, and it's a reflection of how much our community values education and the children in the community. I think every one of my previous board members who spoke before me made very important comments, and I would just like to add to that this is really based on a fundamental value in our school district about fairness. The term "Me Too" was used in some of the emails I received in a way that was not necessarily so flattering, but I would like to frame it another way. It's that we value every single one of our employees. And so the raise that is negotiated for one group is shared and given to every other group. And while we could be looking at the precipice that is upon us because of the projected cuts to LCFF, which are huge, which are in the $30 million is the most recent number I heard in a webinar last week. I think it's important that we embark on how we're going to solve that budget shortfall from, again, a foundation of fairness. So if one employee group didn't actually get their raise for this year, which Mark articulated really well, it's this year's salary, not next year's salary. I think it's important that we're all fair, and then we start working on solving the shortfall together with everybody with the same amount of skin in the game. I don't believe it would be fair to ask our principals and our assistant principals and our other administrators to not be compensated for this year too. I'd also like to clarify that the actual number that the agenda item that we're voting on right now is for the tier 4 management and confidential employees, which are our executive directors, executive directors and them. This is not our assistant superintendents and our superintendent. But I just agree with my fellow board members. This is a fundamental value about fairness that this district has followed for long since any of us have been on the board. I think it probably goes back 30 plus years. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes. Yes, Mark.
Just one clarification, because there was reference to board raises in some of the emails. I just want to make a quick clarification. The 5 board members who are voting on these issues tonight in front of you, none of us are receiving any kind of compensatory raises. We receive an expense stipend from the district of $400 pre-tax a month. That is what we get. That is what it has been ever since I've been on the board 8 years ago. Greg, I'm sure that's gone way back in the time, but I just want to make sure it's absolutely clear. We are not voting for any board level raises.
The last time there were a number of emails that commented on that, because I think there was a kind of a talking points that were sent out. So a lot of the emails talked about the same thing. One of them was the board giving itself a raise. No, hasn't happened. I've been on the board 20 years. The last time this district gave board members a raise was when Joan Buchanan was on the board, before she became an assemblywoman. So that was a long time ago. Was that 10, 12 years ago minimum, right? And then, I'm sorry, Rachel?
It was, the action was taken in December 2006. It was.
There you go. There you go. A long time ago. So it's been almost 14 years, guys. So, and that had been the first raise the district board members had received in many years before that as well. So it's not an annual thing by any stretch of the imagination. I would also like to echo my fellow board members. We are absolutely sensitive and very aware of the emails that we receive. We read them. I read every darn one of them. And I will continue the ones that have come in since the board meeting started. We've also started to respond to those as well. But also the theme that we should somehow treat one group of employees different than the other. In other words, one group of employees should bear some sort of additional burden above and beyond what everybody else should share, is not part of the district's culture. It not only isn't fair, it isn't equitable. And when you have disparate treatment because you're a confidential administrative assistant, you're a secretary, you're not represented by a union, you're an assistant principal at one of the schools, and for that reason you don't get the raise that your subordinate teachers got, that will send a message of disunity. That will send a message that says you're not valued as much as everybody else. We are in the same boat. We are not separate boats in the storm that we are facing with COVID-19 and the financial meltdown at the state's budget. We are in the same boat, and if part of the people helping to bail out this boat we decide to throw them over, that doesn't help. That is absolutely not right. We're going to accept, my position is we're going to accept the burdens and the benefits for every employee group equally, so that nobody is having to take a disproportionate share. Our first priority needs to be kids, not dividing ourselves by individual groups and saying one group somehow gets a raise that nobody argued about, by the way, and another group doesn't, because they're somehow not provided the same level of respect because they're management. I absolutely disagree with that fundamental belief. From an HR perspective also, we pay people, all of our employees, also looking at the lens of labor market. What does the labor market dictate we need to pay in order to attract a good chemistry teacher in that high school vacancy, a good fifth grade teacher at Bella Vista Elementary? We have to do that, but we also do it for our management as well. To attract the best and the brightest principals and assistant principals from our own district and from outside, we have to pay a competitive wage. You're not going to do that if management doesn't get the same increases as everybody else year after year after year. Also, you devalue the premium that a principal gets to be in charge, not just of one classroom, but scores of classrooms, some cases hundreds of classrooms. And there's a premium we pay for that. Every single school district in the country pays a premium for that. If we're not giving raises to management, and this starts a trend, the differential begins to shrink to the point which I've gone in some districts where they've had that philosophy, and you ended up subordinates made more than the assistant principals that were supervising them. You can't do it. It makes no ultimate sense. So we're not giving massive increases to any employees this year. I think that's the other concern, is that some people seem to think how somehow managers are getting more than everybody else. Managers are not getting 1 single cent more than the same percentage raises everybody else got. Not 1 single bit more. I think that needs to be pointed out. So Rachel kind of also pointed out what we're dealing with here is the executive director's low on this item, 10.2. The other items will be individual for assistant superintendents and superintendents, because that's what the law requires. We have to take each contract employee individually. So having said that, any further comments on 10.2? Hearing none. We had a motion and a second. I will call for the question. All in favor say aye.
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 Opposed say no. The motion carries unanimously. We're now on 10.3, consideration of approval of assistant/deputy superintendent salary schedule. This
Thank
is
you,
the
President.
actual schedule.
Thank you, President Marvel. So as the board is aware, the district has for many years used a 5-step salary schedule to establish the annual salaries of all assistant superintendents, including the chief business official, the deputy superintendent, and the superintendent. And the specific salaries that are paid to each of those employees, who are the contracted employees of the district, is identified in each individual employment agreement, and each individual employment agreement is approved initially and each year in the form of addendums by the Board of Education. The district has never published and posted the salary schedule for deputy assistant superintendents and superintendents. And we believe, for the purposes of both transparency and availability to the public, that needs to be rectified. So what we have done is we have pulled together the document that is enclosed in tonight's board packet, and we are recommending your approval of that salary schedule for assistant, deputy, and superintendent effective July 1st of 2019. I do want to point out that this includes the application of a 2.56% increase for this year, as the board just approved for Tier 4 managers and confidential employees. Our plan, once this is board approved, is to post it on the district's website along with all of the other salary schedules for our represented and unrepresented employees. So staff is recommending approval of the salary schedule as presented.
Okay. So we need a motion and a second, and then we'll have discussion.
So moved.
Okay, Ken made the motion. I need a second, and Susanna has made the second. All right, comments, questions? I think it would be fair to say, I don't see anybody rushing to the mic. I think it would be fair to say that the comments that we made on 10.2 would be applicable for 10.3. Is that a fair statement, folks?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Good.
Yeah.
I'm-
Greg,
Greg, I would just reiterate, though, that the way that these salary schedules are in part determined is based on, you know, what these positions look like in other districts to make sure that we're, you know, that we're not the top paid in the state, we're not the lowest paid in the state. We try to find that correct medium point that talks to how we sit relative to similar districts within the Bay Area, as well as across the state of California, and that we're constantly reviewing those amounts to make sure that we stay competitive, but by no means the top paid as well.
Got it. And Rachel, you were saying something?
I just think with your background in salary schedules, and when you explain the way we have the 3-year steps and how that works based on performance, I just think that if you don't mind, could you explain how that works?
Sure.
Because I think that's an informative, it's relevant for people to understand how it's common to other salary schedules and how it's different.
Right. Certainly. No, I can do that. I was on the board when we came up with the schedule in around 2006, I think it was, maybe 07, somewhere around there, when we went to this. It used to be a single step schedule. What we ended up doing is creating a schedule that reflected the board's philosophy at the time, what we composed of at that time, those board members, and I believe it still applies with this current board, is that we are trying to be transparent about what we're paying our top executives running the school district. Many school districts do not have a salary schedule for their executives. They actually they have a schedule where you're eligible for a step increase, but they don't put it on they don't have an actual schedule. It's given to you as part of a contract amendment. And also many districts also have other items of compensation which are not included in the salary schedule. So when a member of the public calls and says, what do you pay your superintendent? And they give them a salary, what they fail to point out, frankly, is that many districts have other items of compensation that they don't have on the salary schedule. You'll have a housing allowance, you'll have a car stipend, you'll have a professional growth stipend, you'll have an allowance for a community stipend to cover belonging to memberships with the Exchange Club and Rotary and so forth. There's all kinds of different stipends. You can have whole life insurance, many districts provide, where you're billed in a cash value. You have additional contributions made to think of it for the private sector, it's a 401k. Public sector has a 403b and a 457. So districts will give additional money to that on top of salary. We don't do that. We haven't done that in the time that I've been on the board. We believe very strongly that that is not a very transparent move. We want people to know it's really simple. Here's what we pay our executives. It's on the schedule for everybody to see. So that's issue number one. Number two, it's a 5-step schedule. Many of our teachers, many of our classified employees move across their schedules every year. You get to move across. We don't do that with our executives. It's a 3-year movement process. So you have to receive an outstanding evaluation above satisfactory. You can't just be satisfactory, can't be average. You must be exceeding standards for 2 of the 3 years before you're eligible for a step increase. And if the last evaluation prior to your step increase was only satisfactory or less, you are not eligible for that step increase until you've perfected that and exceed standards. So it requires a 3 year. So you basically, if somebody's starting at step 1, you have to be here 12 years. Yeah, 12 years before you can get to step 5. So that is not the norm. For most of our bargaining units, a step 5 placement is you get there in 5 years. We don't do that here. We do it in a 12-year process. So that's how we work, and we've been doing that since about 06, and it's transparent. And thank you, Keith, for bringing this item for the board so that it makes it even more transparent to the public. They can see what we're paying everybody. And somebody made a comment about labor market. I think that was Ken. We do not pay our employees at top. We pay most of our bargainers. Our teachers are in the 10% in the state. We have some of the highest paid salary schedules for teachers in the Bay Area. We're either in the top 1 or 2, I believe, when you look at our total comp, and we're in the top 10% in the state of California. The same could be true for most of our classified positions, and the same is true for most of our management. We're not number 1 in the market. We're not number 1 in the state, but we're certainly well paid. And we do that intentionally because we want to make sure we attract the best and the brightest when we have an opening to help manage the district. Okay, and with that, do we have an motion and we had a second? Any further comments? With that, I'll call for the question on item 10.3, consideration approval of assistant, deputy, and superintendent salary schedule. All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed, say no. Motion carries unanimously. Now, the law requires that we take the next items individually, and they are actual contracts of employment. They're actually contracts with the assistant superintendents and the superintendent. Yes. So 10.4, consideration of approval of contract addendums to agreements of employment for superintendent, deputy superintendent, assistant superintendents, and chief business officer. I need a motion.
Move approval.
Okay, Mark has moved. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, Rachel has seconded. Any comments, questions want to be made?
I'd just like to point out, if I could, please, President Marvel, that there are 2 addendums that the board is taking action on tonight that are final actions. One was for the deputy superintendent, whose position was eliminated upon her retirement earlier this year in January. And then one for the assistant superintendent of facilities and operations, who is retiring as of June 30th, and that position will be eliminated as well. So those are basically one-time actions for those 2 employees. And also, I think that it's important just to put on the record that the actual salaries that will be effective for the 2019-20 school year for each of the contracted employees is listed to the dollar in the cover sheet of this item in the agenda.
Got it.
No other aspects of the employment contracts will change other than the annualized salary.
Okay.
And Keith, just to be clear, items 10.1, 10.2, and 10.4 are not additive.
So, say that again, Mark.
I don't.
I didn't hear you either.
Well, I want clarity on this. 10.1, 10.2, and 10.4 are not additive, meaning we're approving in total 461,000.
That's absolutely correct. And that may not have been cleared in the way that we laid out the agenda. So thank you, Mr. Jewett. The total cost of all management, tier 4 management, and confidential employee increases and contracted employee increases this year is slightly over $461,000 total cost.
Thank you.
For several hundred employees when you add it all up.
Actually, probably in the neighborhood of about 125 employees, Mr. Marvel.
Including confidentials?
Yes, we have 4.
Got it. All right. Got it. All righty. There's a motion, a second. Any further comments? Hearing none, we'll take a vote. All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. Opposed, say no. Motion carries unanimously. 10.5, consideration approval of employment contract for the new Assistant Superintendent, Business Operations and Facilities. Mr. Rodzinski.
Thank you, Mr. Marvel. So as the board recalls, on April 14th, the board appointed Danny Hillman as the new Assistant Superintendent for Business Operations and Facilities. The effective date of that appointment is July 1st of 2020. What we're bringing to you this evening is Danny's initial employment contract as an Assistant Superintendent. I just want to point out that this is indicated on the standard contract for Assistant Superintendents in the district. The annualized salary is step one from the Assistant Superintendent's salary schedule. It is a contract whose term is 2 years. Health and welfare benefits are provided in the same manner as they're provided to all other district managers. So with that, we request approval this evening.
Good. Rachel.
Move approval. I move
Second.
approval.
Okay, and then Susanna seconded it. Any other comments? Questions? Okay, so I'll call for the question. All in favor of 10.5, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, say no. Motion carries unanimously. 10.6, consideration of approval of revision to board bylaw 9920, governing board elections. Mr. Medici.
Thank you, trustee. Thank you, President Marvel. The information was provided as an informational item on our last board meeting, and it's being brought back tonight for the action component.
Okay, so I need a
So moved.
motion.
So
Okay,
moved.
Ken has made a motion. I need a second.
Second.
Okay, Susanna has seconded. Are there any comments or questions from board members? Hearing none. All right, I'll call for the question. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed, say no. Motion carries unanimously. Okay, 10.7, consideration of adoption of resolution 84/19-20, California tax on commercial and industrial properties for education and local government funding initiative. Number initiative is 19-0008 for 2020. Okay, Mr. Medici.
Thank you, President Marvel. All of the information is provided here. The resolution is formatted in affirmative support, but there is no direct recommendation from staff. So the board at its pleasure can have a discussion and arrive where it sees fit.
Okay, thank you. So I do have a motion so we can discuss. The second.
Can we discuss first?
There is one public comment.
Oh, go, hold on. Oh, wait a minute. I'm trying to find it here. Hold on. Oh, you're right. 10.7. You're right. Let's have the public comment. We have one that is received from Mike Arata. I recommend additionally the outright rejection of resolution 84/19-20. At best, the resolution is premature, as was the case on February 11th, when a previous version of the resolution was considered. Prematurity is even more the case now than 3 months ago, as local businesses and their employees are all under exponentially more difficult circumstances now than then. As is, some pandemic affected businesses will never reopen. Others will do so with reduced staff and other trying circumstances and hope they can somehow survive. The full extent of economic damage wrought by the coronavirus pandemic, let alone the impacts upon physical and emotional health, is yet to be quantified. Board member Hurd was correct in her February 11th assessment of the situation when she observed with grave concern, A, that California's taxation levels are already among the highest in the country, B, that sunset industrial properties in the district and including their employees deserve your respect and consideration of their needs and concerns, and C, that listening to the interests of hardworking people that run businesses that pay the bills for their families and also businesses that draw students to this community is not, quote, being rude or irresponsible or disrespectful, unquote. As is, California's problematic business climate drives some job maintainers away and discourages some would-be job creators from locating here. So again, I urge you to avoid the obvious cynical tone, deafness that would accompany your approval of agenda item 10.7, that instead you vote not to approve that resolution. And that is the only public comment we've received. Cindy, are there any others that have come in since?
There are not.
Good. Okay, then that is it on 10.7 public comments. Okay, Ken.
Yeah, so before we make a motion, I guess let me make a quick comment if I can, and maybe kind of direct or start the conversation first. I'll just start with my own opinion on this. I'd like to see us either take no action at this time or take no position on the resolution itself. And I don't say that lightly. I think what we have here are a couple of very, very difficult competing imperatives. Clearly, as we've talked before, we are in desperate need for financial change within the education system here in California. Our district alone has had to deficit spend. We've had to go out to our community and get their support a number of times for parcel taxes, for general obligation bonds. And each time that we sit down with our employee groups and talk about compensation, we've been put in a very difficult position of having to look at what the state provides us now and what they might provide us in the future when trying to determine how well we can support the folks who work for us at all levels. Unfortunately, the state's not provided what we've needed. And it's looking now, because of the current crisis, the economic hit is going to be even that much worse, and not knowing how long that's going to go. Now, in some ways, that might point to the need for some type of action. The conflicting imperative that I see, though, is, to me, I'm not sure that this is the right action, particularly in a community like ours. My fear is that this is a solution, but it's a solution with so many unintended consequences that it can end up hurting us even more as a specific district, not to mention the impacts you could have across the state. When I look at us as a particular district and some of the actions that are handed to us from a financial basis from the state under current terms of LCFF, we would get much less than many other school districts, given the way that finances are currently structured. Because of the type of student population that we have, we get a whole lot less of what's known as supplemental and concentration dollars. And the direction of the state in allocating funds has been to provide based upon those LCFF factors, which has been said many times before. Us receiving mainly the base amount of LCFF money gives us the second lowest funded schooling in the state. Again, recognizing that those funds by other school districts are needed. They're serving difficult populations that do require additional funding. My concern is, however, that a lot of those school districts aren't held accountable for how they use those funds. My fear is that unless there is sufficient change in the way that school finance is done in California, it's not going to improve. The accountability isn't going to improve, and the funding mechanism across the different school districts is not going to improve. And the fear of what this might mean in terms of the economic hardship that is going to put on commercial properties and the possible domino effect that could have on smaller businesses that rent properties, as well as possibly onto citizens at large at some point in time. I'm not even talking about that aspect of it. My concern is trying to find a balance that's going to not create these unintended consequences that can actually end up hurting our specific community. I know that a lot of people are putting a lot of time and effort into coming up with these solutions. I believe strongly we need to continue to work with our legislators at the state level and at the federal level to come up with better solutions. Given the timing, I just don't believe this is the one. I'd rather we not vote against it, however, because I think we as a school district need to send a message of how important it is that change needs to occur. So I guess what I'm saying is, personally, and I'm very interested in hearing from my fellow board members, I'm personally following on the direction that was provided by the California School Boards Association just a week or two ago, and came up with a position of no position at this time on this particular measure and the resolution that we have before us today. And I'll stop there.
Okay, any other comments? Anybody? Mark.
Yeah, I'll go. Very articulate, Ken. Thank you for your perspectives and the speaker card as well. I struggle with this because are California schools and San Ramon Valley schools underfunded? No question. There's no question there. We need additional sources of funding, and this is one that might benefit our schools tremendously. So I invite the community to become aware of it and do some research. When I was researching this particular measure, what I have found is still a lack of the addressing of those unintended consequences, Ken, that you speak of and the speaker card mentioned. I'm not an economist, and I'm certainly not a commercial real estate expert, but the way I look at this, there's a macro and a micro effect here. The macro effect is, and just as we saw in the hundreds of speaker cards on 10.1 and 10.2, there is a lot of concern in the community about the health of the economy. What does this mean? Are we in a recession? Are we on the verge of a depression? I've seen 1 in 4, 1 in 5 Californians out of work right now. I've seen that growing to 1 in 4 by some noted economists. The Q3 dropping, GDP dropping 33%. We usually get a little upset when it goes up 1%. It's going to drop 33%. So on a macro level, it seems a little odd to be looking for fiscal contraction policy, meaning increased taxes, when everybody in the world is trying to figure out how to push money into the economy. That's the whole policy behind the CARES Act and the HEROES initiative, fiscal stimulus. So I'm a little conflicted on the macroeconomic effects because I don't know what they are and I haven't seen a whole lot of research and analysis on it. And then on the micro effect, just thinking about our Valley, I don't know how many commercial leases are net leases versus gross leases. Net leases meaning the tenant pays for property taxes. If that's the case, and the majority of our restaurants, the majority of our clothing stores, the majority of our ice cream shops, if they're on net leases, then we've just, and we passed this legislation, and they're otherwise affected, we just introduced a variable cost out of their control. It's not like an increased tax on profits where you earn $1, you pay a marginal rate of tax on the dollar. This is an increased cost for these businesses that has nothing to do with cash flow or profitability. It's got to do with the market rate of appreciation in those properties. And that could be very damaging. I don't know what that looks like in our community. So that's why I struggle with this, because I desperately want new funding sources. And here comes one that looks like it's going to provide that source of revenue into the future, but I don't yet know what it's going to do to the macro and micro economies. If we lose families because we supported a measure that ran their business into the ground or out of town, that's not going to reflect very well on us. I can't yet sign my name to a measure that I cannot answer. What's the opposition? Mark, what's the opposition to this bill? Explain to me what the adverse consequences might be. I get the good it does, but I can't yet explain what the bad is. So I'm in agreement with you, Ken. I really think we should defer until at least I can get my hands around this and I get more clarity on it, and hopefully the entire business community can.
Okay, Susanna or Rachel, you want to speak up one way or another?
Yeah, I also went back and forth, and I think in the past board meeting when this had came up for discussion, yeah, I had kind of said that, well, it really, I didn't want to take position at that point because I'm looking, and Mark is very eloquent in terms of the economics, but I was really looking at how it's going to affect our students and parents, right? I mean, anything that happens with their parents' livelihood, the work and things like that, it's going to affect the students, of course. And then of course COVID hit, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, we need funds. We need funds anywhere we can get, right? So on a kind of a, principle level, I really want to support this. Like, I don't care what it is. We're just gonna, I'm gonna support this. But then again, backing down on a principle, just a purely principle, and say, okay, what's the practical? I'm going back again into like, what is this going to mean to our certain number of parents who, will be affected if, if our business community cannot support these exports and stuff. So I actually support Ken's position and the school board, California School Board Association, saying maybe we should take no position right now and just see what, any other information that comes out in the next, couple months, few months.
Okay, thank you. Rachel?
I had concerns about it last time we talked about it. Those concerns are even more serious now that we are in this COVID environment. I am really worried about the effect on our local businesses and our local regional economic environment. I totally hear people when they say we are making decisions for kids, and I think we would be being blind to be ignoring that catastrophic issues in the business community locally and regionally wouldn't affect kids. We have parents that have jobs. We've heard a lot about that in a lot of the emails that we received today. Yes, our schools need more money, but I do not think that this measure is the right solution right now. It's not the only solution out there. It's the only solution that's on the table for this upcoming ballot. And I just think the world today is not the right place to support this measure. And I would support Ken's suggestion to vote no position.
Okay, so I've also thought a lot about this. Somebody made a comment to me, and I think, and it kind of helped clarify for me my position on this issue. I got elected to represent the kids. What's best for kids in the Valley. And obviously, I think we all agree what's best for kids is additional funding. What we don't have is a solid source of funding that gets us out of the basement, because that's where we are. We are in the basement, second lowest funded in the state for a wide variety of reasons, but LCFF is the primary motivator of how we end up being in the cellar. But it's a revenue stream that would generate at some point, several years down the road. I think people think that the money will start flowing as soon, assuming this bill passed, this initiative passed, the money would start flowing. It will take a number of years for the money to actually begin to be sent to us by the state. Well, why is that? Because you require reassessment of all the commercial property that would be covered by this initiative. Reassessments take time. The assessment pretty much has become a fairly routine, fairly low maintenance, if you will, process, because it was simply based on what it was if you still own the property from when Prop 13 passed, what it was, and there's a percentage increase that you would apply under the law. Now you have to assess every piece of commercial property that's now covered by this change in the old Prop 13. And that will take it'll take years to bring up, I'm told by county assessors, years to bring up the level of assessment personnel to be able to do it, number one. And number two, there is an assessment appeal process that we are told many businesses will apply to try and reduce the assessment that will ever come out of the county assessor's analysis of that commercial property. So we're talking years down the road before we'll actually see the money. But I'm looking at this from a more macro perspective. What I think this bill is, or this initiative is attempting to do, is send a clear message of desperation. The public education is being starved to death in this state. We manage our heroic teachers and our classified employees, our principals at the school sites, do every year with less and less available dollars because of cost of living, you know, the inflation rate, the fact that the state has imposed on us many costs that used to be the state's obligation. They move that obligation down to the state, like pensions as an example. And so I see this as a real wake-up call, canary in the coal mine, if you will, saying we're desperate enough as an educational community that we're willing to explore something so fraught with potential danger. And I absolutely agree with Mark and Ken on the economics that could result from it. But people are desperate. They need the money to provide a quality education for their kids. And then ultimately, I was elected, not business community, I was elected to represent the kids. And in some ways, and I don't see this as a blame game, but in some ways, I don't think the business community has stepped up the way they could have and should have over the years to help solve the funding problem in this state for public education. Ultimately, our business community, locally and statewide, they get our end product. They get the new employees. They get the quality kids that we're graduating from our high schools and going on to our colleges. They're employing these people. And if they can't get people because many districts in the state aren't able to provide the kind of quality education that's necessary, there's an effect for that. And you hear stories after stories of economic studies showing that before the COVID-19 crisis, many employers in the state had a problem getting qualified applicants. That's, in my opinion, a direct result of a lack of quality education funding being provided so schools can do a quality job. So in the final analysis, although the part of my brain is agreeing with Mark and Ken and Susanna and Rachel, part of me is also saying maybe the business community and the state in general needs this wake-up call to say, okay, if we're not doing this, what are we going to do to solve the problem of the lack of funding in this state, not just for us as a district, but the vast majority of school districts in California, way underfunded compared to the national average. So if it was up to me, if this was we're going to have the votes to put it as a motion, but if it was going to come onto motion, even though I view myself as a fiscal conservative, I think we have to do what's best for kids. And I think at a minimum, this would send a wake-up call to the state and the business community to say, get involved in the fact that we're not getting properly funded. Get involved and make a difference, because Sacramento will listen to the business community. They clearly aren't listening to school districts when we argue about the need for funding. We're not getting that. So if it was up to me, I would probably vote yes on this, but since we do not have, so I'm not sensing that there's a motion and a second available from my fellow board members where we can take a vote, yay or nay. So with that, then I would declare that the item, for lack of a motion and second, cannot be voted on. And we will move on to the next item. Unless somebody has one last shot. No?
You know, Greg, the one thing that I would add, editorializing on your last comment, is it's a shame that all of the money that's going to go in on both sides of this issue for November isn't given to our educational system instead. And,
Right.
and that created seed for doing what you're suggesting.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I don't think anybody in this room believes that our educational funding is, one, adequate, and two, the method for distribution of the available dollars is fair. There's clearly issues. We got money from the federal government, a very small percentage of money from the federal government to help impact us because of the COVID-19 crisis. We got around 400,000, I believe, to help us. Yep, I'm seeing a thumbs up. There was a district in this county that received over $10 million. Yep. So a significant difference, and same funding formula from the state, but our share was 400. And we're the largest district in the county, and a district smaller than us got 20 times as much as we got. So there's clearly issues both with the available dollars and with the way the formula is driving who ultimately gets the money. So, but I agree. I'm hoping this is a wake-up call. I don't know whether it will pass. It's obviously on the ballot. I don't know if it will pass in November, but hopefully, if not, something will come along that will solve the problem. All right, we're on to 10.8, consideration of resolution 82-19/20, approving Contra Costa County Office of Education's required $8 million reduction as a condition of AB 1200 approval. Mr. Medici.
Thank you, President Marvel. On March 3rd, Deputy Superintendent Clark came before the board and spoke about their conditional AB 1200 approval, or the conditions required. One of those conditions was, which totally predated anything about COVID-19 and the coronavirus economy that we're now facing, was that the unrestricted expenditure imbalance in our school district, which exceeds $8 million year over year in the turn the page costs, needed to be remedied. So this template, which is attached to the agenda, to the resolution itself, is a pathway to beginning to remedy the $8 million. And it will be fully integrated not only into the adopted budget, but ultimately into the first interim report of 2020-21, which is set for December 2020. So all the information is here, and of course here to answer any questions the board may have.
Okay, board members, I need a motion for the resolution.
Excuse me, President Marvel, there is one
Oh.
public comment.
You're right. I'm sorry. We did get a public comment on 10.9. This is from Julie Zickerman, mother of a 6th and 8th grader at Iron Horse Middle. I know we are in just a huge mess, and I know it feels like we cannot sustain our schools, but we have to. How do we get our schools back safely? By cutting class sizes in half, hiring more teachers, and maybe securing more space for classes. I know this seems like a huge stretch. In fact, it seems impossible. But maybe, just maybe, this is how our schools should have been functioning all along. We have this one opportunity to get it right and do good by our future leaders, our children. We have to put dollars into our schools, not take it away. Somehow, some way, we have to do this and lead by example. As far as I can see, we have no choice generation. Please, 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 our children beg of you, do not make cuts to our schools' budgets. We need to do the opposite to figure out how to support the budget. Thank you for your time. And with that, do I have a motion? And then we can talk. Folks, anybody want to make a motion? Okay, thank you, Susanna. We have a motion on this item. Do I have a second? Okay, Rachel, we have a second on the item. And comments. Open it up. Who would like to speak first?
Go ahead, Mark.
It's not so much speaking, is I'd like to, Greg, can you run down these items for us? I just like a lot of granular detail as we think about these.
Yes. So the structure of the template that is on page 57 of the agenda envisions meeting the county's $8 million request by a series of both cash flow and direct savings items. The cash flow components are primarily related to trying to augment the cash flow of the unrestricted general fund by utilizing some restricted resources, and that's specifically related to a restricted maintenance resolution that's going to be in front of the board either on June 9th or June 23rd. Another vision on the cash flow savings relates to how the next approximately 15 years of solar project payment is kind of paid for by borrowing from the future instead of kind of the current cash flow design. And then finally, there are some education center and service center savings, including the, as previously acted on by the board, savings related to kind of the elimination of a business office executive director position and so on. The second category is directly related to site and department level unrestricted budgets. The portion outlined here is approximately 10% of their budgets as a further reduction on top of the approximately 10% that the budgets have been reduced over the last 2 years. Again, this whole entire list predates the newfound challenge of the lack of revenues in a coronavirus economy. And then finally, the human resources components in a declining enrollment environment. These two categories of both certificated and classified positions envisions a continuing very strict and beyond current assumptions kind of adherence to aligning staff to declining enrollment numbers. So Trustee Jewett, that's the vision behind this structure. The structure actually was created all the way back in March upon both the county's request and the tentative agreement between our bargaining groups. And so it's brought to the board tonight after lengthy cabinet thought and approximately 2.5 months of deliberation.
And Greg, the items under human resources and services are fulfilled through attrition into right sizing or other action?
The vision is attrition, and certainly if something beyond attrition is required, the board will receive notice and take action upon that.
Okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify, because I think one of the emails, at least one that we read, right, that we received today, someone had said that the pink slips were given to our employees, and I don't believe that's the case, right?
The March, and Keith Rajinski just popped up. Mr. Rajinski, maybe if you could comment on that, please.
I will, yeah. So on the certificated side, the only employees who received notifications of their employment ending were employees who were temporary in contract whose employment was scheduled to end anyway. They received a reminder letter. And then employees who are non-reelected, probationary employees who are non-reelected. So a pink slip is usually referred to as, like a layoff notice.
Right.
There were no layoff notices to any certificated employees. Classified employees, though, you'll remember at the last board meeting, you approved a resolution for about 7 FTE reduction of various classified services. there are a number of impacted classified employees who did receive those notices, and some of those notices include complete eliminations of their positions. So some of those employees may have been considered pink slipped.
Okay, yeah, and I remember actually receiving one of those myself way back for recession. But I just want to make sure that wasn't, yeah, the certificate full layoff notice. Okay.
And those 7 classified were what kind of positions, Keith?
Those were all supplemental positions funded through, by and large, through external sources. They were a combination of classroom paraprofessionals, library media coordinators, some noon duty supervision, I believe. But they were all supplemental and externally funded, Mr. Marvel.
Got, yeah, that was, I wanted to make sure that was pointed out and reminded by everybody. Okay, Suzanne, Rachel, or Ken, you raised your hand.
No, Rachel, go ahead.
Okay.
I wasn't ready. Go ahead. Go ahead. Please go
Okay, go ahead, Ken.
All right, just a quick comment. You know, for a number of years now, we've been having to deficit spend. And the ability that we've had to deficit spend has been that we have managed our reserves very conservatively. But also we've been able to maintain reserves because unfortunately the way that the state has provided funding to us since the Great Recession has been through a lot of one-time dollars. And those one-time dollars trying to hold for one-time expenses end up in reserve accounts that then get doled out appropriately as one time. Unfortunately, you know, for the last several years now, we've been having to spend down on those reserves in order to meet different obligations that we have as a district. And we find ourselves in this particular position. Again, this is all pre COVID-19 crisis type of issues. We still have that big hurdle that we're going to have to address. But this one deals much, much more closely, in my view, to what's happened to our reserves in the last several years and putting us in a position where we now have to look much, much more closely at the allocation of funds that have dwindled down from reserve. So I'm just, with that, I guess suggesting that one of the debate items for discussions that we've had in the past that we're going to need to continue even as we work through the current crisis situation on economics is correct reserve percentages. How much a reserve we believe is correct and how do we maintain that? And it's not just a board decision, but again, a community and a staff understanding of the value of reserves so that we have the money when we need it. It's basically the family that has savings and is able to deal with issues that arise, as opposed to the family that's spending paycheck to paycheck and then some disaster occurs and they either have to take out an expensive loan or have to do without because they just don't have any other wherewithal to meet those economic needs. And I think we're finding ourselves at the precipice of that position right now with this AB 1200 condition to demonstrate the $8 million that we currently have before us. So my only point here is really to say, you know, as we look at reserves going forward, I hope this creates a better understanding of the need for establishing a strong reserve, one that makes sense for the district, and making sure that that is part of the process that everyone understands we need going forward.
Yep. Okay, Rachel. Uh-oh.
Well, ever since we were told in March by the county business official that we had to make $8 million in cuts, I've been like dreading, you know, where are we going to do that? How are we going to do that? Our management team has been working diligently for a long time now at right sizing, and that includes first right sizing management. I know Rick can probably give us the details on that, and I'd like him to. But these are the next steps. And part of that is right sizing for our declining enrollment. And part of it is trying to be as efficient as possible of how we meet the needs of the district from the district office point of view. And I know there was quite a bit of downsizing related to changes in teachers on special assignment after the implementation of Common Core. And so we've made some shifts in how we are approaching ed services. And I guess I'd just like to ask Rick if he could, for the sake of the over 300 people who are watching, explain the efforts that have already been made. And this is the last step to get us to where our budget can be approved by the county. Rick?
Rachel, you broke up a little bit for me. I just, let me see if I can ask you if this is the question you'd like me to kind of respond to, that some of the steps that we've already taken in planning effort to kind of take on the new coronavirus economy challenges. Is that?
No, it was the efficiencies we've been working on over the last few years to deal with declining enrollment.
Okay.
And that this is really the last step of that.
Yeah, okay, thank you for that. So thanks. And again, thanks. This is working through all our technology here, so that's good. So now I understand better. So since the 2017-18 school year, cabinet, trustees, employee groups have really worked to really explore ways to address our new reality of budget challenges, but also face the fact for the first time in decades that we are declining enrollment. And I think the example I often give is there's an elementary school in the Doherty Valley when I arrived in 2016 that had nearly 1,300 students. That school now has 700 students. So that's a significant example, but a very real example. So that, I think, is something that we've tried to do to really examine not only enrollment related efficiencies, but also as work has changed. And in many of our staffing positions, both in terms of managers and teachers on special assignment, were really built on 2014, 2016 models. As an example, the TSA model really grew out of the transition to the Common Core, as an example. So what we did there is we really tried to zero in on where the work was, where the support was needed, and the TSAs did spectacular work over many years, but the work had changed and some of the priorities had changed. So those are a couple examples. Also, when you look at on the classified side, as an example, when you have a school of 1,300 elementary, for example, you might be cleaning 32 or 33 classrooms. But if there's half as many students, maybe you only need to clean half as many classrooms. So an example of that would be one less custodian, as an example. So lots of those kinds of examinations, both in terms of certificated staffing, which is really specifically contractually related to the number of kids enrolled in the school, to classified, which is a little bit less formula driven, but driven by the number of kids, and also management in terms of just priorities and how we work. Just within this school year, we eliminated 10 management positions. That's just since the school year started, all driven by attrition. So those are just a handful of some of the things that we've done to examine our practices, our budget, workflow, and work expectations changing over the last 3 years.
Okay. Rachel, any other comments?
So just that none of us want to make these cuts, but we've got to, or we have to keep our financial house in order. It's not pleasant, and it's no one wants to do it, and we're trying to keep it as far away from the kids as we can, but it has to get done.
Okay, any other comments? Mark?
No.
No. So this is a direct result of a comment I had made earlier, absolute evidence of the broken funding model that the state has given school districts. Prior to the LCFF model, the state covered basically if you had increases in pension costs, it was a state obligation. They paid it. They increased your revenue. in your allocation to pay the increased cost you had to pay to the pensions in Sacramento, the pension systems. When LCFF was put into place, the first thing they did is they changed the funding model, and the pension costs now became a local funded requirement, not the state giving us money to cover when the pension boards would raise the employer tax. In effect, we're getting taxed based on every dollar of payroll. And our pension costs have gone up dramatically in that time, where the prior was a state obligation and it is now a local obligation. Mr. Medici, that amount has come to how many scores of millions?
Approximately 100% higher over the last decade, and approximately 25 million more in costs over the last decade, 50 million total.
50 million total increase in the cost of our pension. So that used to be a state obligation. That is now a local obligation. The money that we get every year from the state, what we've been getting in the prior, like for 1920, was substantially under what it cost to turn the page. As I'm saying this not for board members, I'm saying it for the people that are watching, so they understand why we're in this predicament. You do that year after year, approximately 14 million, I believe, for 1920 to turn the page, and we got the equivalent of about 6 million in new dollars. Is that about right, Mr. Medici, for 1920?
It's certainly correct that our structural costs were higher than our revenues. That's correct.
Yeah. So you do that year after year after year. You can only do that so long. It's like your personal family, your household account. You bring money in from your employer, but you spend more every year than you're getting from your jobs, and you're using savings accounts or credit cards, heaven help you, in order to make even. But at some point, the savings run out, the credit cards run out. We don't have credit cards. School districts are prohibited from basically going into debt unless the voters specifically approve it through a bond measure. So the bottom line we've got is we don't get the money every year to turn the page. This $8 million structural deficit is a result of that. And the county said, you got to clean it up in order for us to agree to any of the changes that we have made for our teacher salaries, as an example, this year. And we had to eliminate the structural deficit. So that's what this 8 million is doing. I'm concerned about one issue, well, two issues. I'm concerned, one, about I need to understand the solar principle so what are we doing? Are we basically borrowing from the future is what we're doing?
Correct.
So it's our money. So it's not like we're going into debt for it, but the money in the future that we had set aside to pay that debt in the years coming up will have already been spent. So we'll have to generate either additional revenue to cover it, or we'll have to do budget cuts somewhere else, because a debt is a debt. We're going to have to pay it.
Correct.
Is that a fair statement? Okay. All right. So do we have any idea what the long-term financial implications of doing that are going to be? Because obviously we have to come up with the money some point, since we're spending it early, in effect.
Correct. Every dollar we spend early, we have to come up with $1 or more in the future, because we'll have no small interest earnings over time from the county treasury. But basically, this list envisions $1 million of solar principal in 2021 being paid for with future reserves. So we would have to find a new $1 million, and the absolute payment is due. So right now, the board, since inception of the solar projects, has aligned solar payments and kind of a solar fund designed to meet those payments over time. This is different than that, and will take from the payments designed to meet the payments over the next 13 to 15 years and and take $1 million and use it in 2021.
Okay. So we are rearranging, we're not generating additional income. We are rearranging the apples in the cart so that the county can bless the budget.
That's the concept.
Okay. And then what is the percentage cut to our classes, our departments, and our school sites? I see 200,000 in one item and 300,000 in the other. What is the percentage of that cut?
Approximately 10%.
Okay. And we looked at all other alternatives to come up with the 8 million before we had to touch that.
Correct. We looked at significant amounts of alternatives. These were the seem to be the most kind of fair and equitable and across and kind of participation across various parts of the school district.
Okay, understand. All right. Any other comments or questions from anybody?
Greg, just because misery loves company. Are you aware this is prevalent across California? Meaning SRVUSD is not in a hole all by itself here.
Absolutely. There are some estimates, and again, not prior to coronavirus, we were not alone, and there were hundreds of the approximately 1,000 LEAs that were facing similar kind of structural deficit issues. Now that the coronavirus is upon us, there are some estimates that as many as 800 or more school districts, LEAs are basically facing impossible financial choices. So Trustee Jewett, to your core question, absolutely, we are not the only district, and in fact, the majority of districts, in my opinion, are facing similar decisions for the 2021 school year and beyond.
Right. And for the people watching, I think they need to understand that there are serious consequences, as the Deputy Superintendent from Contra Costa County, County Office of Ed said, there's significant consequences to us as a district if they don't approve our budget. If we don't show that we've found a way to balance our 8 million structural deficit, there are serious consequences. They can take us over financially, and they will run the district for all financial matters, which are just about every decision a board can make has some impact on the finances. So they made it very clear to us at a meeting a number of months ago, we better, if we don't make up this 8 million, they basically won't approve future budgets, future settlements with our unions, and they could even take us over financially. So that's the predicament that we're in, and it's a pretty darn serious one. And again, I won't go into a litany of why we're there. We all know why we're there. Okay, any other comments or questions? All right, we had a motion, right? It's been a while. Yes, we had a motion and a second. Hearing no, I'm going to call for the question. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, say no. The motion carries unanimously. We're on to discussion. Governor's May revise update. Oh, goody, more good news. Mr. Medici.
Thank you, Trustee Marvel, and technologically give us a split second to pull up the PowerPoint, please. Thank you. So on everyone's screen, there should be a PowerPoint presentation that outlines the governor's May revision and both projections related to the state of California and also our own school district. So on the second slide, we're going to talk about those items. So if we could get, there we go. And thank you for that. So on slide 3, and again, we'll wait for that to pull up. Slide 3 is the very stark reality and mentioned earlier, I believe, by at least one trustee, that GDP, whether at the US level or the California level, so gross domestic product, in the Great Recession, the worst quarter, which is brought forward right here, 8% plus contraction in GDP. The estimates for the coronavirus Q2 of 2020, which was March through June, is possibly 42% plus, as outlined here. So a kind of near impossible scenario, never imagined, likely the worst kind of quarterly drop, even exceeding the Great Depression, not just the Great Recession. But the direct impact that will have on California's economy is very real. Slide 4, and again, it will pull up any moment, envisions that this kind of GDP contraction will have major implications on the state's general fund revenues. And it's one thing to talk about next year and how the state sees its revenue, but even revenues this current school year for the state of California are contracting by billions of dollars. The state, as many know, also kind of postponed the April 15th tax collection deadline to July 15th. That has its own implications for the state's cash flow, but ultimately the actual revenues, cash flow or not, for 1920 are projected to go down significantly. Unlike the Great Depression version of that, the state is not talking about mid-year cuts to this current fiscal year, but that certainly could have been an option and really only compounds the issues for 2021. So slide 5 takes into just so the record shows that there is still a lot of unknowns related to the state's budget, even on the facts that they believe they have now. So those unknowns will continue to cause certain uncertainty, not just in the next 45 days between the time that the state adopts its preliminary adopted budget, but ultimately and very likely through the fall, as we all learn more about how the federal government may assist all states, not just California, but then also what is actually happening to California revenue generation. And slide 6, the following slide actually envisions for the first time in many years, dating all the way back to the Great Recession, that it's very likely that, and many experts believe that the state will revise its 2021 budget after it adopts it between now and June 30th, hopefully. The part of that revision hopefully will also be some support from the federal government, but it will likely be related directly to just California information. So we'll keep that in mind and obviously bring changes to our own budget. Slide 7 discusses that the fact that, and I think it was also noted earlier, both by trustees and in the union president comments, that as recently as a few months ago in January, there was a vision at the Sacramento level that that Proposition 98 funds, which are the primary source of K-12 school funding, would be at record levels for 2021. Our own assumptions assumed that San Ramon Valley Unified revenues would continue to grow. Now, no one imagined the scenario that we are facing, and that is a multi tens of billions of losses in California state revenues, and how that then translates to us is tens of millions of local revenues lost. So slide 8 is a visual representation of that Prop 98 funding. Again, kind of dating back to the 18-19 school year, the 78.4 million was kind of record billions to the Prop 98 equation. This year we were set to continue to break that record at 81.6 million, and then further continue to break the record at 84 billion. And I'm sorry, I said million, billion with a B. But now the pink bars outline that even in the current fiscal year, California is not going to meet its own Prop 98 projections, and then next year a truly unprecedented cliff. in Prop 98 funds. All the way back to the Great Recession, similar cliffs year over year are not were not part of the equation even during the Great Recession. So it's very real. On slide 9, part of the state solution, and we're appreciative that they are getting very creative on the accounting side. Some of the state solutions will be cash flow related, similar to our own. What this slide 9 and then ultimately 10 represents is that the current fiscal year 1920, the state is envisioning that a nearly $2 billion number in terms of actual writing a check to school districts will not occur until the following fiscal year, the next year starting in July. And then in the following fiscal year, a further, by the end of next fiscal year, a further 5.2 billion is envisioned to not actually be sent by check or by transfer, but instead be deferred to the 21-22 school year. So again, these cash deferrals are helping because otherwise the state would have to cut even further. But they do create a scenario where we have school districts have their own cash flow issues, and we may have to incur costs to borrow money. Slide 11 is a direct takeoff of the state's decrease in Prop 98 funding on a per student basis will result in, by current estimates, a 10% reduction per student. That is on average in excess of $700, depending on the type of student, and it's a far too complicated conversation for tonight. But the state pays based on the grade level of a student, and suffice it to say, and all the numbers are here, but at least a $700 per student number is envisioned as a cut for next year. Slide 12 specifically charts the various categories of districts that have certain levels of unduplicated pupils and then receive greater levels of supplemental and concentration dollars. The pink circle captures the group that we are part of with unduplicated counts between 0 and 20% are unduplicated counts, depending on the year, right in the plus or minus 9 to 10% zone. So we are part of this group that on average is very likely to receive a $700 plus per student decrease in funding. The slide 13 is another version of kind of seeing the same information, but again, whether we count COLA going up and then the state taking a 10% reduction, or the state simply saying you're going to get what you got in 1920, and then we're going to take 7.92% away. Either way, we land on a scenario where the base grant in 2021 is absolutely materially lower than 1920, and in fact goes all the way back to levels that predate 1920. So what this means for us is slide 14, and again, very stark news, and the business office certainly apologizes for bringing it to the board and the public, but the stark reality is that we have over 30,000 students, or specifically kind of average daily attendance units. If we were to take a $7 million assumption, that's at least 21 million on LCFF alone. There are other components and actually larger ADA numbers and accounting resources from Sacramento that place the number at closer to 25 million. If we were to take, again, as mentioned, the governor's January budget envisioned and our own assumptions for the second interim envisioned that we were likely to receive 10 million more dollars for the 2021 school year. So the combination of the real less dollars plus our own assumptions that are going to have to come down by a $10 million plus number, that is a $35+ million issue layered on top of our 2021 kind of financial outlook. And slide 15, again, a point that we discuss often, the turn the page costs, but the blue part of the graph shows the decline, again, an average decline, but very closely approximated to us, a decline in revenues. And then the green, pink, and yellow, and then kind of clear columns show the kind of the natural increases. We'll see in a slide momentarily that one of the state's kind of accounting pieces is attempting to create a scenario where our contribution to pension for STRS does go down approximately $90 per student compared to what was previously projected. The issue, like many things with accounting, is that bill has to be paid. And what is shown on a slide, and this is very real data, is that saving $90 per student next year, followed by saving $12 per student 2 years from now, again, as a projected basis, is going to cost the district over $200 within our own multi-year projection. So a very finite medium-term timeline, but by 2022-23, these accounting pension-related accounting pieces are actually going to cost not just San Ramon, but every school district in California. So we're saving $102 at a cost of paying $202 per student in the medium term. Slide 16 shows this exact component. It's the only component of our structural cost that is envisioned to, at least on the STRS side, go down a touch next year. But on the PERS side, it simply is causing a projection that the increase is going up less than would have already been increased. So in PERS, our costs are still going up, just at a slower rate. But ultimately, in the future, starting in 2022-23, our costs are going up so more than projected. So slide 17 is just a visual of what this does to not just our reserves, but just a visual of reserves. We've previously shared a slide like this. This slide directly relates to, again, the average school district in the state of California, which is why we brought it instead of our own. In June, we will bring slides that specifically reference our own slides. And finally, we just wanted to make sure that in slide 18, we noted that there is a lot of kind of to still consider, both for the state and for our school district. But ultimately, this coronavirus crisis is very different from the Great Recession, possibly even very different from the Great Depression. And depending on if it, if the recovery is V-shaped, U-shaped, or L-shaped, which I know we're all hearing about in the media, those are three very different outcomes for the state of California and specifically San Ramon. So on slide 19, we just note that in June, we will be bringing information to the board about the adopted budget based on this May revise. Immediately thereafter, we will go to work to integrate whatever the state ultimately adopts into our own 45-day budget revision. And then ultimately in September and December, the two major reporting periods and reports will align what is actually happening, both in the 1920 year, this current fiscal year, and then ultimately basically the first 4 or 5 months of the 2021 fiscal year will be represented on the first interim in December. So that's everything. I hope that it was clear enough, but again, we know it's complicated, so we appreciate everyone's patience with this information.
Okay, so with that, any questions or comments? No? You're all stunned?
Yes.
Yeah, it's very surreal to get your hands around the potential enormity of this issue without federal legislation. I mean, 35 million users in the hole compared to where we thought we were going to be is going to be a community effort to not only understand the magnitude of this, but to find solutions for this. This is going to be, I don't have the right word. As I said, I'm a little stunned. I don't have the right words.
Right.
Greg, maybe you can talk a little bit about that. I know as part of the May revise and the governor's outlook for the budget, one of the things he's saying is that if the state were to, the feds were to step in, they can remove a lot of this. Can you just comment on that aspect of it?
That's correct. Governor Newsom has envisioned a scenario where if the federal government steps in, then most of that $700 reduction per student could be restored. Based on his vision for federal restoration, there may not be a scenario where kind of California exceeds 1920 funding levels. So for our school district that and many others that had assumed increases to the 2021 fiscal year, we would still have major 8-figure, $10 million plus issues relative to our previous assumptions.
Thank you.
Just thinking through the enormity of this though, Greg, I mean, with all the contingency planning the district is doing around distance learning, hybrid learning, in classroom, socially distanced learning, now we got to confront these enormous financial problems that we're going to create additional contingencies. This is an enormous amount of work, an enormous amount of stress that this district is going to be under. And I recognize that. And we're going to have to think through this together, how we're going to manage through all this.
Yeah, I just kind of wanted to mention that the irony, actually, right, of Newsom's, had said, oh, we're going to start school and we need to do all these things, and we actually will get, if we were to get back into a classroom, right, in a safe way, that most likely we will have much smaller class sizes, but we actually will need more funding for, supporting that and online learning, more robust remote learning and facilities and cleaning. I mean, even technology, right? So yeah, it's mind-boggling, and I think we really do need federal help. And yeah, I don't know how we're gonna, I mean, we can't cut everything, and it's and we don't want to, but this is going to be a big issue if we don't have help, I think, from the federal government.
Rachel,
Yes.
you said something, but we didn't hear it.
I'm having connectivity issues. Why don't you go ahead?
Okay. I have a question, a technical question, Greg, on understanding PERS and STRS as a separate fiduciary responsibility to maintain the fiscal solvency of the pension systems. PERS has been independent for quite some time with that. STRS had a legislative oversight in which the legislature would dictate what STRS could charge. I understand that's going away, where the STRS board will independently be able to set their own actuarial levels of contribution. So when I'm seeing numbers here where they're limiting or decreasing our pension taxes, our basically contribution we're required to make, is that because the state is making up the difference, or have they convinced the two pension boards to reduce their actuarial requirements for the next year or two? Because you're right, ultimately there's a pay. I mean, the math is the math is the math. If they've got an obligation to basically attempt to get fully funded on their pension obligations, when you're getting less money than actuarially you're supposed to be getting, there's a cost to that. It's like, again, you're taking out a loan that you'll ultimately have to pay back with interest, is what it sounds to me like is going to happen at PERS and STRS level. But is what is happening? The state is basically covering what the pension boards are saying our contribution should be?
It's a combination of both of your points. It's really
Okay.
the state is accelerating some of the payments that it envisioned making as part of last year's adopted budget, but the 1920 fiscal year budget, they had a multi-year plan to kind of pay down some of the STRS and PERS debt. They're now going to actually be accelerating some of that cash forward into the 2021 year. But again, that necessarily means they don't envision being able to make as high of a payment in future years as they envisioned. So that will require more payment from everyone, including them. What this data also doesn't reflect is the actual kind of return impacts to return that the coronavirus economy may be doing to the pensions themselves. So most experts believe that these numbers will continue to grow a larger pension tax over time.
Yeah, they have a longer, you know, the rest of us, we look at a cost and the available resources in our savings accounts, because really that's what the pension system is. It's a savings account for future. They're talking hundreds of billions. They don't look at the next year out. They have a 25-year window. So they could have a great year where they brought in billions in income from great investments in the stock market, but they don't, when you spread that out over 20 years, it's a slight blip upwards in their revenue stream. And they do the same with downgrades, the same concept. They to even it out. But you're right, the amount of losses in the stock market are going to be fairly scary. And I suspect that even over a 25-year, when they roll it out over 25 years, we're still going to see an increase in the required contribution to make up that shortfall. I think you're absolutely right. Don't see any way around it. Well, this is very uplifting. The other comment, Susanna, I think somebody else made it as well, and that was federal government. I think it's not a zero chance, but I think it's substantially less than a 50% chance that we're going to see federal money coming. You have the reality, those of us that took it, I made this comment earlier in a prior meeting, you look, there's a thing called economics that we all took in college, I'm assuming most of us did. Economics 101, you take it and it's pretty clear. You cannot violate, it's not the theory of economics, it's the laws of economics. And there's a consequence for spending money you do not have. And that's what the economists in Washington, D.C. are looking at and say, we can't keep giving $2 trillion, $3 trillion, and $6 trillion monies when you add up all the monies that have been proposed to shell out, when you don't have the revenue to pay for it. And so they're generating basically funny money by having the Treasury print up money that has no real financial backing in terms of tax revenue to pay for it. So that will ultimately devalue the dollar and could very well spark inflation for the economy, which would not be a good thing. Those of us that were around in the late 70s, very early 80s, remember inflation rates in the double digits and interest rates to buy a home at 18 and 19%. And that was a direct result of a economic model that didn't look at the laws of economics. It ignored it, and we paid as a country the consequence for that. So I think the problem we have is at some point, the federal government is going to look at the laws of economics and say, as much as you need it, we don't have $3 trillion available to give you. That seems to be the consensus in Washington at the moment. Those that have a vote, none of us here at this table do, those that do get to vote are going to go, nope, we've given you enough. You gotta figure out what you're going to do on your own. That's more likely. It's not 100% that that's going to happen, but more likely than not, we're on our own to fix this problem. Isaiah, what's your take on that, Mr. Medici?
I think that's a true statement. Oh, well, everything you said economically is true. And then I think it's a true statement that that it may be a 50-50 proposition that that California receives enough to make a material impact on this issue.
Well, and the last stimulus that we got that the feds gave us for COVID-19, we got 20 times less than a neighboring district.
That's correct.
So even if they give money and they use the same funding formula to hand it out, we're not going to see very much. We're certainly not going to see 30 million.
On that, absolutely not. Not on that
Yeah.
formula.
No, not on that formula. Okay, this is not an action item. It's just an information item. Any further questions or comments from board members? Hearing none, we're on to the next item, 11.2. Assembly Constitutional Amendment 5, ACA 5. Mr. Schmidt.
Okay, thank you, President Morrow. Thanks, trustees, for a good discussion again. Last week, the superintendent's office received an email from a community member asking the Board of Trustees to discuss Assembly Constitutional Amendment 5 at their next board meeting. That board meeting is now. The proposed amendment aims to repeal 1996 Proposition 209, which banned affirmative action in California. The bill is currently still in committee and must pass both the Assembly and the Senate with a 2/3 vote in order to qualify for the November 3rd, 2020 ballot. Again, this community member asked for a discussion only, and this is not a action item.
Okay, discussion.
So I guess I can start it
How
off.
does this bill?
Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead,
Go
Rachel.
ahead, Susanna. Go ahead.
Well, okay, Susanna, go
can
for
go
it.
first.
Yep, got it. Go ahead, Susanna.
So yeah, well, with this bill, right, I was kind of looking at it, doing some research, because it's actually very, it is very controversial with, both sides, right? And so I tried to do research on it, and then I figure, okay, you don't really need to go into everything for the purpose of our discussion here, because we're talking about really public education. So I'm looking at this and said, oh, okay. So really, we're public education. In that way, it doesn't affect us because we take all students, right? Like we can't turn anyone away. So in that point, it doesn't really affect us. So I'm just wondering, okay, so as a public school district, what does affect us with this bill? Or
So Susanna, what it affects is you're thinking of it from your experience working in higher ed.
right,
So you're right. We have to take all comers regardless. If they live in the community, they're our responsibility. What this is referring to is employees, future employees, and contract issues. So
Right.
the letting of contracts to vendors to provide services or goods to the district. So it really doesn't affect students in the higher ed classic sense. It impacts who we hire, how we hire, and who we contract with to provide services. And
yeah, exactly. And that wasn't, sorry, that was my rhetorical question. I knew that.
oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. Yeah, sorry, I was going rhetorical. So that's, and that's exactly what I was going to, Craig, that for us, right, it actually affects the people we hire and the people that we give contracts to. And in that sense, then, just want to, I think, clarify that, a couple of points I was thinking that before I go into any further, that I have to remind everyone that everyone, I think when we think of this affirmative action, I want to make sure that we're talking about affirmative action and not quota, because that's very different, very different. Not for quota at all, but affirmative action, I think it's kind of a, right, it's just kind of a equity thing, point at least. And then also, I think when people talk about affirmative action, they always think about the two subgroups, right, that is affected. and they don't, I think most people don't need to be reminded that it's not only the Black or African American groups and the Latino, Hispanic groups that would be affected. It is also Asians, because Asians are not a monolithic group. There are plenty of Asian groups who may need affirmative action, like Vietnamese, Laotian, the Hmong. I mean, not just Chinese or Taiwanese or people from Hong Kong, right? Like myself. So, so I want to give that. And I was thinking that, okay, so in our higher ed that, I kind of usually study on, as well as for us, I think at this district, because I want to make sure that I'm not talking just, out into the clouds, but for our district, I think the student to teacher or administrator ratio, it's not, it doesn't reflect our demographics. So, so actually I asked that to the district, and it's not like we're not trying, but it really is, you can only interview, you can only hire those who are qualified and who actually applies. And as far as I understand, not as many of those groups, applicants in those groups. And then to your point, Greg, it goes all the way back to funding for education. Why don't we get qualified applicants from those groups? And it is education, how we prioritize education for everyone, not just certain groups who can afford education. And it goes all the way back to equity, and it's just kind of full circle. And that's how I kind of think about this. I mean, anyway, I'll stop now and let you all kind of discuss this too.
Okay, Mark, or no, Rachel, you were next.
I was going to ask some questions, but Susanna just answered all of them. So I can pass to the next person.
That's
My
perfect.
question was really, how does it affect us? And I think she did a really nice job answering.
Excellent job. Ken, any questions or comments?
No, I appreciate Susanna discussing the topic, but nothing to add at this point.
Mark.
I'll be honest, I'm not exactly sure what the question is before us, other than to discuss these bills that are still in committee that I don't have a whole lot of information on and no data to support a debate at this point. But if we're just having a general conversation or discussion on affirmative action equating to equity and diversity, absolutely, I'm all in. We have to provide opportunities for everybody in our communities. But again, I'd like a little bit more direction on where we want this discussion to be going.
Right. Well, since it's just discussion, I don't think the request from the committee member was to discuss it, not to vote on it. So,
I think that maybe if we can just give more information. I know that some of the the group that I'm part of, APAPA, right, the Asian American. I was thinking about maybe just also providing some discussion points on both sides, see how it is. Because right now, yes, it requires, it's not even on the ballot yet. I don't know, Rick, if you had any sense of whether or not it would likely to become on a ballot. But I'm just thinking that, again, I think AC5 is to repeal Prop 209, which banned affirmative action in 1996. And it was affirmative action before the state had affirmative action. So it's like, okay, so we're repealing a ban, and I have a feeling, that in the future, maybe there was something else coming. So we're just placing Band-Aids. We really need to go and, you know, make sure that we're really addressing the cause of why affirmative action, who it benefits, who really benefits, and again, why with the affirmative action and a ban and a repeal, you know. So yeah, going back to it, Greg's, the underlying, I think, issue is enough funding, or we pay our teachers enough, right? Teachers, not our teachers, but teachers are paid enough as a profession so that students are attracted and are encouraged to study education, become qualified, and apply, you know, for these public positions.
Yeah, I think what it comes down to is, I think since it's not an action item on our part, it actually is probably a little premature potentially. But I've been involved in business and labor and HR for decades in public agencies. So I lived under the old affirmative action practices and policies and laws, and then the post Prop 209 implementations. And I've worked in some heavily minority districts where I was implementing that stuff. And it was interesting that the different ways public agencies handled it. I think, as anything, Prop 209 was a result of, it was a reaction to bad practices, some very public bad practices that the press pointed out on how agencies were manipulating affirmative action, and not to the benefit from a diversity perspective, but you know, you were the chosen group, and so you got positions, you got quota. I think the term you used, Susanna, was quotas. And unfortunately, it was easier bureaucratically for some public agencies to apply quotas than it was to actually go out and do outreach to bring in qualified applicants from a diverse base of applicants. You can't hire more Hispanics, more Blacks, more Asians, more whatever. You can't hire if they're not in the pool to begin with. And so that what Prop 209 forced those of us in the public sector to do was do more outreach so that you could bring in diverse candidates. And then statistically, the odds were that if you had a diverse pool, you would end up with diverse actual hires. And if your numbers didn't match, what the federal government looked at is if your numbers for hires were pretty far off percentage-wise from your applicant pool numbers. So you have X percentage of Asians, X percentage of Blacks, X percentage of Hispanics, whites, whatever. If your hiring numbers were wildly different from those applicant pool percentages, then they would go in for a deeper dive to figure out how come. You know, were you discriminating against one particular group over another? And I was involved in one district where it was actually Asians that had gone to the federal government alleging that agency was, before I got there, I'd like to point out, I had to fix it, but before I got there, Asians were being systematically discriminated against in hiring. And my research found, I won't say what agency, but yes, in fact, they had been discriminated against, and I came up with a plan to get fixed. So Prop 209 was a result of some bad practices. And so I think it's early. First of all, we're not being asked to make a decision, but I think the bottom line is it's an interesting discussion, which probably it's been a long time. So it's time to probably rethink and rediscuss how we're treating diversity hiring and contracting in this state. I think it's a good discussion to have. Don't know what the fate will be. Don't know if it'll be asked to be brought back where we do take a vote once there's something actually on the ballot, if there's something on the ballot. But it will affect us because it will directly impact our hiring practices and will directly impact our contracting out for vendors for services and for supplies. That's the bottom line. Any other questions or comments on this topic? Hearing none, we're over with discussion and information. We're on to board member reports. So who'd like to start? Ken, I'm going to pick on you.
Mhm.
Nothing this evening, thank you.
Nothing. Susanna.
Well, I attended a couple of different virtual things, which Ken actually and Rachel I saw had attended to, with regards to budgeting and, you know, looking at certain things, and but also advocating. So we're going to, I know Rachel's going to speak to it. She's been in I think a couple of things with our legislatures, but I'm also scheduled actually to be meeting with the Saulnier's staff tomorrow, I believe, and we're gonna kind of advocate for, you know, for their help in either through state or maybe their, you know, advocacy to the federal, both governments for more funding for us, for the schools.
Who's going to be in that meeting, Susanna?
I think it's set up by School Board Association at Contra Costa County School Board. I think it's yeah, it's like different. Like I think maybe about at least a dozen school board members from Contra Costa County.
Gabe Weiss is setting up meetings with our local electeds, and he's picking the Contra Costa school board members who are in those jurisdictions. So I've been part of 2 meetings with RBKs. One was with their staff, but the one last week on Friday was with her. And we had one with Glazer's staff as well. And we've got those 2 ones, our California electeds, for on a regular monthly basis. And Rebecca was part of an assembly meeting today. She was looking for actually hard numbers she could take to her meeting, because she's definitely eager to lead the charge on doing something for school. She was just asking the participants to brainstorm, you know, pretty much anything. And it was interesting that a lot of them wanted the thing they focused on was relief on the pensions. But of course, the discussion we had a little earlier about can't just ignore it, because then the problem is a really big problem in 5 years. And that's really what a lot of the other board members were saying, was just relieve us for the whole obligation. That would be huge, but I don't know how realistic that was. But it was nice to see how open and eager she was to hear from us and to be able to go recommend us. And Susanna and I also both attended the Mental Health Coalition, San Ramon Valley Mental Health Coalition, run by Kathy Superintendent. That was interesting, and that various different speakers from the 2 police departments and different agencies were talking about the calls related to mental health. There were some statistics about John Muir, and they were quite alarming, but our folks aren't seeing those kind of numbers, so that was at least reassuring.
Good. All right. So is that it for your report, Rachel?
Yeah.
Okay. Mark, any comments? Ken has rethought his passing.
Mark, go ahead first and I'll catch up.
The only thing I was going to say, emotional day, emotional night, I was going to rest, but Rick, please reach out to your staff and thank them for me. I understand everything they're doing is on top of an already impacted regular day job. It's an incredible amount of contingency planning, incredible amount of stress. Same comments for you, Mr. Medici. As a parent, I appreciate it and I understand it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark, and I will do that.
Ken?
Yeah, my comments actually along the same way. You know, as school board members, this is one of those weeks that we look forward to normally throughout the entire school year, being able to attend promotional exercises, graduations, and I know I'm going to miss it this week. And you know, I could feel the disappointment by our families and our students. But I did want to give a shout out to the staff for all that they're doing to try to make it as memorable for our students as possible. I was going to ask just real quick how how things went at school today. I understand today was one of those days where we're having kids come in and trade books for clothes and things like that. But I really do, as Mark was saying, really appreciate all the extra work that's going into trying to make this as comfortable and consistent of an environment as possible. I'll just share one thing that I did on my one video for the high school, reminding the students that, you know, this is something that they'll have to be able to talk about with their grandkids, how they graduated during COVID-19. And just keep in mind that
uh-oh, we lost Ken for a moment. Ken is speechless.
Moment of brilliance.
There you go.
I know,
Yeah.
and he was just ready to say
Am I-
something
am I
really
done?
good.
We're back. You're back, Ken. We lost you for a minute.
Okay, sorry, didn't know why I left off, but just in terms of, you know, when our students are older and they're sharing stories of living through COVID-19 with their grandkids, expect the same rolling eyes that they do with their parents and grandparents today when they tell their old time stories. So other than that, again, Rick, thank you, and to all the staff, thank you for all of the extra efforts to bring this stuff down.
Yep.
Yeah.
So yeah,
thank you.
when those of us of a certain age remember when our parents or grandparents talked about, you think you got it rough, you know, 5 miles in the snow, you know, on horseback, if I was lucky, getting to the one room schoolhouse that was maybe heated, maybe not, you know. So yeah, so for us, it's going to be, you know, COVID-19 and the great pandemic of 2020. You know, you think you got it rough, let me tell you, for our graduates this year. Yeah, great. Best part of being a school board member isn't dealing with the budget. Sorry. It isn't dealing with the financial crises that we seem to have consistently every year. It's handing out diplomas to kids starting out, eager, fresh, excited about life. And my God, they got through high school finally, and it's on to college or the military or jobs or trade school, whatever they're going to. It's absolutely the best part about being a board member. And I'm going to miss that. I'm going to miss that. I'm going to miss being able to shake people's kids' hands. And so what are you doing next year after graduation, and handing their diploma and looking at the excitement in their eyes? It's what's kept me going for 20 years on the board, and I'm not going to get that. So I'm hurt. But, you know, we're doing the best we can. And yes, to echo my fellow board members, our staff has done a phenomenal job. There are 3 primary things that standing by themselves would be major unprecedented hurdles and crises to overcome. The pandemic itself, the fact that that's one. The second is the inability to be able to provide normal instruction, and then coming up with an alternative. Third, the financial crisis that we're being hit with. Unprecedented. Even during the Great Recession, it wasn't as bad as we're being hit with for 2021. And our staff has stuck with it, worked enormous hours to try to turn it around, and do what we can to get through it all. Because frankly, folks, we don't have a choice. We can't fail at any of these. Our kids deserve the best quality education we can provide, given the resources that the state so generously doesn't give us. That we have, but we got to make it work. Failure is not an option for our kids. We deserve it. By the way, a statement came across. I got a message that came across my screen. I have dual split screen on my laptop. Basically, somebody had commented to me that they were upset that we didn't read the 300 plus emails for comments. We would be at it for quite some time, although many of the emails were absolutely identical. I mean, word for word. Somebody had sent out a script to write, but that didn't diminish the fact that we read every one of them, and that we recognized the concern raised in the community. But no, we did not read 300 emails. We did read the emails when we had 1 or 2 for an item, but obviously not 300 for obvious practical reasons. But I just wanted to point that out, that somebody had complained that we hadn't read 300 of them. So, all right. So superintendent's report.
Just very briefly, I'd like to turn on your compliments of staff, and thank you for that. And thank all of you again for your passion and your leadership and your dedication. And I want to remind 400 plus viewers here tonight, following us virtually, that you are essentially volunteers above and beyond your day jobs and your families. And it was nice reading some of those emails today. I didn't read all of them. Many don't know that. Many, I think, assume that you are employees or that you work full time and this is your job and you're making money, and none of that is true. And I know that during these difficult times, you're as involved as ever, if not more. And I appreciate that. And I want to remind all of you that staff points it out to each other, as we appreciate your leadership and your support and your really, at times, incredibly informed line of questioning. And when you don't have answers, you ask lots of questions. So I appreciate that. Tonight was another example. And many of you know, I check in with my mom almost daily, and was doing that this weekend. And she was reading something about George Washington, and she is of a certain age, Greg Marvel, where she remembered the Great Depression and World War II and the social unrest of the 60s. And she reminded me of something George Washington said: out of adversity, he drew great energy and determination. And I see that from all 5 of you. So thank you.
Thank you. Well said. Well said, Rick. I appreciate it. And you're right. It gets to the point that the problems that we are faced with now will only make us stronger, because we have no choice. Our kids deserve it. We have no choice. Failure is not an option. With that, we are, if there's nothing else to come before this board, we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.